Somewhere in the empire was the train station full of people. It was a Twango station, and on platform number 999 was Bianca, who wore a summer dress and a hat, while on her shoulder she had her purse. With the other hand she was holding her carry-on luggage. She couldn't help but blush and smile, since it had been a long time since the last time she had left the academy. Behind her were Sancho, Tudor, Sinclair, and Piggy, who wore the academy uniform. With a confused expression, Tudor mentioned that if someone saw them they would think they were going on a trip to some tourist place. He asked Bianca not to forget that they were going to fight. With a serene gaze, she said that then at least they should be somewhat tense. Then she began pointing to one side with her finger. About far from them was a group of students chatting among themselves. Bianca began to point at them with her finger, and while her eyes were shining with confidence. With a smile she made it clear that anyway, in this Olympic survival competition, their Colosseo Academy was going to be the best again. The Olympic survival competition had begun. It was a tournament where the four most prestigious academies of the empire gathered. The first was the Elite Academy. The Colosseo Academy, recognized for offering the best education in all disciplines. Then there was Boot Camp Varangian, a training center for warriors specialized in melee weapons such as swords, spears, axes, and bows. An academy identical to the Colosseo Academy in structure. An educational system would also participate but composed only of women, called the Mizera Women's University. Lastly, there was the host of this edition, an Eastern Academy that brought together those who followed the path of magic, known as the Wizard Training Institute, or Magic Tower. Tudor's attention was fixed on Bianca, and with a curious gaze he asked if this time the headquarters was the Magic Tower. Bianca turned to him, and with a calm expression nodded her head and revealed that the headquarters was in Dorsmile, in the southeast of the continent. Where the Magic Tower was located, it was famous as a resting place. While they were walking through the station, the loudspeaker began to sound, revealing that the Continental Circuit train was entering the station. The next station was Huangdo, imperial capital, Huangdo Station. They approached the train tracks and began to contemplate the train. The eyes of Sancho, Bianca, and Sinclair began to shine with joy, while on the other hand, Tudor's and Piggy's jaws dropped in surprise and astonishment. The train arrived at high speed, it was releasing blue smoke, and in front of it there was a powerful magic circle. The train stopped at the station. Piggy clenched his fists and his eyes began to shine with excitement, since it was the first time he was going to take a magic train. Sancho rested his hands on his waist and with a confident smile mentioned that he had already taken this train, once when he had come to enroll. While Piggy was observing the train with amazement, Bianca started pointing at them with her finger and asked them not to make a silly face. Upon hearing this, everyone's attention turned to her and their eyes widened in confusion. With a confident gaze, Bianca began to show a finger and revealed that on this train were also the students from the Varangian Academy and from the Mizera Women's University who had already boarded at the previous station. According to her, they could not allow their rivals to underestimate them. While they were talking, several students got off the train. Among them was a man who had a scar on his face and a woman. Piggy's attention and that of the others focused on them. Not long after, the students from Varangian Academy, with serious expressions, began to get off the train. And then, with a smile, the girls from the Mizera Women's University also got off the train. Everyone went to the station store to buy some food. Piggy's eyes widened in surprise, as he was surprised to see that suddenly everyone had gotten off the train. Tudor, who had his arms crossed, began to observe them and with a serious expression noticed that the atmosphere was quite tense upon noticing that everyone had gotten off to shop at the store. Tudor extended his hand to one side and with a confident smile mentioned that the students of Boot Camp Varangian must be grinding their teeth at seeing Sancho. With a confused gaze, Piggy extended his hands and asked why they would be grinding their teeth at seeing Sancho. Sancho, who was standing next to him, began to show a smile and his eyes started shining. Tudor closed his eyes and with a smile revealed that Sancho had placed first in the entrance exam of the Varangian boot camp and then had entered the Colosseo Academy. Sancho's eyes began to shine with confidence, and he couldn't help but smile since when it came to fighting, he was always ready. While they were talking, Bianca approached them and questioned if Sinclair was in serious trouble. Upon hearing this, Sinclair's attention fixed on her and her eyes widened in surprise. Bianca remembered that she had also placed first in the entrance exam of the Magic Tower, and first in the entrance exam of the Mizero Women's University. Sinclair couldn't help but smile and blush like a tomato. They got on the train. Being in first place always made her nervous, since if someone did well, at least they could tie, and if not, they would lose. Piggy, who was reading the train ticket, started walking down the aisle of the train. Tudor, who was behind him, extended his hand and with a smile asked her not to worry too much. Since the real aces were the third-year students, also according to the data, there were going to be 50 third-year students, 30 second-year students, and 20 first-year students. Sancho and the others began to listen to Tudor in silence. With eyes shining with calmness, Tudor began imagining various magical objects. Among them there was a book, a sword, a dagger, and a necklace. He remembered that it was said that if they managed to rank among the top 10 in this competition, they could choose a treasure from the warehouse, shared by all 4 academies. He decided to make sure he got at least one treasure. They arrived at their seats, left their suitcases, and got ready to sit down. For Tudor it was a shame that Vikir had not come with them. Tudor sat in the seat, crossed his arms, and let out a sigh since once again Vikir had abandoned them to team up with other boys. The attention of Sancho, who was sitting next to him, focused on him. With a smile he mentioned that it was said that Vikir had a prior commitment, so it could not be helped. He liked seeing that Vikir valued his promises that made our boy seem worthy of admiration. Bianca, who had her head resting on her hands, started to gaze off to one side and remembered that Vikir's seat was in a separate car. She couldn't help but wonder if he would have problems with students from other academies. Upon hearing this, Sinclair's eyes widened in surprise. Now she was also worried about Vikir. Kegi turned around and his face filled with sweat. He couldn't help but get nervous since more than worrying about the other academies, in reality he was more concerned that that boy was with Vikir. At the same time, in the other train car, there was a boy with purple hair. With a lost gaze, the boy sat in his seat and began to look at the floor. It was Granol of Leviathan, the third son of the Rikudokam Leviathan family, one of the 7 great houses of the empire. He had grown up being praised as the greatest genius within his clan, and until now had never allowed anyone to surpass him. Under a cherry tree was Sinclair, and Granol was watching her from afar. He had ranked second in the entrance exam, and the person who had trampled on Granol was a commoner without surname or lineage named Sinclair. Granol put his hand over his chest and couldn't help but blush. It was his first defeat suffered at the hands of a low-class commoner. However, as time went by, a strange feeling began to grow in Granol's heart. With eyes shining with joy, Sinclair began to contemplate the cherry petals. That feeling had been born from the very moment he saw her for the first time. Her white hair that drew attention, her flawless skin, her large eyes like those of a deer, her delicate and harmonious nose and lips. While she was distracted, Granol and his men were looking at her with love. It was in that moment that he discovered in his heart that he loved her. Although he denied it strongly, it was an inevitable fact. He approached her, started pointing at her with his finger, called her and with a smile asked if she had found a team. With a surprised gaze she turned around. He tried to get closer to her little by little while reproaching himself for not being able to say anything more than sharp words like commoner. Pointing at himself with his thumb, he decided to let her join his team. Upon hearing this, Sinclair's eyes began to shine with joy and she started waving at someone. With a gaze full of joy she began to run and passed by Granol. Upon seeing this, his eyes widened in confusion and surprise. He could not help but clench his teeth tightly and feel furious. Behind them stood Vikir, lost in his thoughts. Sinclair extended her hand and with a smile began to talk with him. At the same time, in the train car where Granol was, Vikir and the Baskerville triplets were also there. Granol began to stretch his feet due to tiredness. Our boy's attention was fixed on him, and he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. As if Granol were at home, he rested his feet on Vikir's knees. Our boy started to gaze toward the ground, not knowing what to say. Granol began to stare at Vikir with eyes full of contempt. He didn't know why Sinclair felt attracted to Vikir. He thought the reason was that both were from the lower class. He knew that this time he had to crush Vikir completely, and for this reason he had joined his team. Vikir began to gaze silently to one side. Granol started to take out a bottle that he had under his clothes, and with a furious gaze made it clear that he was going to be the leader of the team, and asked if Vikir had any objection. With a serene gaze, Vikir mentioned that he only cared about Granol doing his role well, and also questioned why he had rested his feet on his knees. The triplets' eyes were shining with rage. They couldn't believe someone dared disrespect Vikir. Granol said that he wanted to stretch his legs but needed somewhere to rest them. He called Vikir commoner and asked if he had a problem being the footrest of a noble. The triplets clenched their teeth tightly and their eyes widened with fury. Granol asked if Vikir wanted to fight and if he knew what the pain of being poisoned was. Granol prepared to take a sip from the bottle, began pointing at Vikir with his finger, and with a furious gaze told him not to strut in front of him from now on, since if he made a mistake, he would implant a poisonous insect in his body. With eyes shining with evil, Granol extended his hand and poison began to emerge from his hand. He again called Vikir a commoner and asked if he had understood. While the poison was emerging from his hand, Vikir began to gaze toward the ground in silence and sank into his thoughts. Our boy stood up, made Granol stop resting his feet on his knees and decided to go to the bathroom. Vikir turned his back and Granol's eyes began to shine with rage. He asked him what he was doing. With shining eyes, Vikir closed the door, put his finger near his mouth and with a penetrating gaze gave Granol the order to be quiet. With eyes shining with rage, the triplets prepared to give Granol a beating. He clenched his teeth tightly and couldn't help feeling furious and thought that Vikir was crazy. Just then, the triplets grabbed Granol by the head, making his eyes widen in fear and confusion. Poor Granol began to scream. Vikir got out of the train car and started walking. He apologized but knew he couldn't let Granol interfere. Vikir began to contemplate the landscape through the window, knowing that in this Olympic survival competition, they had to achieve results without fail. He knew that only the top 10 had the right to take an artifact from the shared treasure. With that right, he had to enter the treasure, because he had to destroy one of the artifacts that was in there. Vikir's eyes began to shine with determination. He was standing on top of a cliff and a demonic eye was staring at him intently. This artifact was the inanimate demon, the 7th elite corpse Chilbansi Decoravia. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,